A foreign leader is captured, not extradited, not negotiated, captured, no courtroom first, no international consent, no shared legal process, just force and a plane. This is not a movie scene. This is not fiction. This is how Nicolás Maduro was taken. And the moment it happened, something far bigger than Venezuela cracked. Because when a superpower reaches into another country and seizes a sitting leader, the question is no longer who deserves punishment. The question becomes far more dangerous. Who decides the law? This has happened before. In 1989, in Panama, Manuel Noriega was indicted, then invaded, then removed, then tried. At the time, it looked decisive, clean, successful, but success can be misleading because every act like this leaves a trace. A precedent, a permission slip. If you care about power, law, and the future of global order, stay with me. What you're about to hear isn't about Maduro. It's about a rule that may already be breaking. And to understand that rule, we must first define the problem itself. At first glance, the story seems simple. A leader is accused. Drugs, corruption, threats to democracy. The United States indicts him, then moves to take him. To many people, this feels intuitive, even justified. Bad man, good outcome. But international law was never designed for intuition. It was designed for restraint. The real issue here is not Nicolás Maduro, and it was never Manuel Noriega. The real issue is process. Who has the right to seize whom, where, how, and under what authority? Normally, there is a system: extradition treaties, sovereign consent, legal cooperation between states. That system exists precisely to prevent force from replacing law. But in both cases, the system failed, or rather, it was bypassed. And when law is bypassed, something else steps in: power. That shift from legal order to unilateral action is the core of this story. And once you see that shift, the past starts to matter. Because this was not the first time, and it will not be the last. To understand why, we need to go back. To understand this moment, we have to return to the 1980 seconds. The Cold War was ending. The old rules were dissolving. The Reagan doctrine had a logic. Intervention was framed as resistance, a response to Soviet power, but by the late 1980 seconds, that logic no longer fit. Manuel Noriega was not a Soviet proxy. He was something else, an authoritarian ruler accused of drug trafficking. Embarrassing, unpredictable. For Washington, this created a new problem. How do you remove a leader who is not attacking you with armies, but is still described as a threat? The answer was subtle, but dangerous. Crime was elevated into security. Drug trafficking became aggression. Corruption became intervention. Legal language began to stretch. Internal memos argued that U.S. law could travel abroad, that arrests could occur without consent, that self-defense did not require missiles or tanks. It only required a claim of danger. This was a turning point, because once law is reinterpreted to fit power, history stops being a guide and starts becoming a warning. And that warning arrived in December 1989. December 1989. 14,000 U.S. troops move into Panama. Fast, overwhelming. The operation has a name: Operation Just Cause. 4 objectives are announced: protect American lives, restore democracy, defend the Panama Canal treaties, arrest Manuel Noriega. It sounds orderly, almost surgical, but reality never follows talking points. There is no armed attack on the United States, no invasion to repel, no emergency unfolding in real time. Yet the language of self-defense is everywhere. Noriega is described not as a criminal, but as an aggressor. Drug trafficking is framed as war. Corruption is framed as intervention. This is the moment where the line disappears, because international law allows force only under strict limits. Necessity, proportionality, immediacy, those limits collapse here. The invasion succeeds. Noriega is captured, flown to the United States, tried, convicted. From the outside, it looks decisive. But beneath the victory lies a quiet shift. A political objective is wrapped in legal language. Then the language is used to justify the force. And once that happens, the precedent is set. What worked once will be used again. And the next time, the consequences will be larger. What really mattered was not the invasion itself. It was the reasoning behind it. Two legal memoranda changed everything. They argued that US law could reach beyond borders, that American agents could seize suspects abroad, even without consent, even against international custom. The justification was simple and dangerous. Self-defense, not against armies, not against missiles, against crime, against drugs, against political threats redefined as security threats. This is the hidden mechanism. Once crime is treated as war, law enforcement becomes military action. Once self-defense is stretched this far, limits lose meaning. Extradition becomes optional. Sovereignty becomes conditional. Consent becomes irrelevant. The logic is circular. Political goals define legal principles. Legal principles then justify political goals. International law is no longer a constraint. It becomes a tool, and tools are used, not obeyed. This is why Panama was not an exception. It was a template, and once a template exists, someone will reuse it. Sooner or later, fast forward, different country, different decade, same logic. In Venezuela, the language returns. Drugs, conspiracy, threats to democracy. Again, a leader is indicted. Again, extradition is impossible. Again, consent does not exist. So the solution is familiar. Custody first, law later. Crime is elevated into a national security danger. Not metaphorically, legally. Officials blur the line on purpose. Drug trafficking becomes aggression. Corruption becomes armed attack. Political embarrassment becomes existential threat. Words do the work before force does. This is the second crisis, because once self-defense no longer requires an actual attack, any powerful state can claim it. No missiles needed, no troops crossing borders first, just a narrative. And narratives travel faster than tanks. The danger here is not escalation, it's normalization. What was once extraordinary now feels routine. And when that happens, the law does not collapse all at once. It thins quietly, and the people who feel that thinning first are not presidents or generals. They are ordinary citizens, which brings the story closer to you than you might think. When powerful states bend the law, they don't feel it first. You do. Not today, not tomorrow, but gradually, because when legal limits weaken at the top, they disappear at the bottom. You are told it's about security, about protection, about keeping you safe. But notice the shift. Arrest without consent becomes normal. Force without restraint becomes acceptable. Process becomes a nuisance. And once that logic exists globally, it never stays abroad. If leaders can be seized without rules, citizens can be watched without warrants, stopped without cause, labeled without trial, this is how exceptional power trickles down. Not as tanks in the streets, but as quiet permissions to bypass, to rush, to decide first and justify later. You may never care about Maduro or Noriega, but you live inside the world. Their cases create a world where law protects less and power explains more. And once that balance shifts, it is very hard to shift back, because now this is no longer just America's story. It's the world's and the world is watching. The world did not stay silent. It never does. After Panama, most governments refused to endorse the action. Not quietly, openly. Votes followed, condemnations followed, the language of non-intervention returned with force. Because other states understood something immediately. This was not about Noriega or Panama. It was about precedent. If one country can invade to enforce its criminal law, others will claim the same right. Russia watches this. China watches this. And they learn, not the rhetoric, the method. That law can be bent with enough narrative. That sovereignty can be overridden with enough justification. That power only needs a legal accent. This is how precedents travel. They don't move as rules. They move as excuses. Each time the standard is lowered, the global floor drops with it. Soon, unilateral action feels less shocking. Condemnation feels weaker. Resistance feels symbolic. And international law begins to look less like a shield and more like a suggestion. This is the cost of normalization. And once normalization sets in, the future stops being abstract. It becomes urgent because the next chapter is not about what has happened. It's about what could happen next. From here, the world splits into paths. The first is the optimistic one. Law pushes back. States resist imitation. Self-defense is narrowed again. Force is restrained by rules. In this future, Panama and Venezuela become warnings. Studied, debated, contained, international law bends, but does not break. The second path is quieter and more likely. Precedents accumulate, each case explained as unique, exceptional, necessary, but exceptions stack. Force becomes easier to justify, consent becomes optional. Legal language grows flexible. The law still exists, but it is thinner, selective, uneven. Then there is the third future, the dark one, where major powers openly act first, and legal arguments follow as decoration, where self-defense means inconvenience, where criminal law travels with soldiers, where sovereignty protects only the weak. In that world, international law does not disappear. It survives as theater. The question is not which future is possible. All three are. The real question is simpler. Which one is being rehearsed right now? And that brings us to the final insight. Here is the hard truth. International law does not collapse in explosions. It erodes in precedents. One case becomes an exception. The exception becomes a method. The method becomes normal. Panama mattered because it worked. Venezuela matters because it repeats. Not because the leaders were innocent, but because the process was bypassed. Law is not judged by outcomes. It is judged by limits. Once limits are ignored by the powerful, they will not protect the weak. This is not about America alone. It never was. It's about whether rules restrain power or power rewrites rules. And that choice is being made quietly, case by case, operation by operation. If you want a world where force answers first and law explains later, then this path makes sense. If you want a world where law still means something, then these moments matter more than they seem. Because the future of international order will not be decided in one invasion. It will be decided by what we accept as normal. If this analysis sharpened how you see power, stay with me. The next video goes deeper.